Today I'm with Grégoire Comte, Head of Coverage at ING Corporate Banking in Luxembourg. We'll talk about the corporate banking market, how it is evolving, what the constraints are, and what it means in practice for Luxembourg. Grégoire, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Vincent.
Let's start with your recent move. So you recently joined ING here in Luxembourg. What drove that move and what has struck you most after a few months compared to what you expected?
Well, first, the reason for me to move to ING was the fact that it was a historic leader on the market, especially on the private capital sector. And I moved by moving to ING. I multiplied the number of colleagues on the ground by close to 300. So that meant that I had the full capability to structure, I would say, the highest level of service with people on the ground that had the expertise historically of serving that category of clients.
Okay. And was there anything that turned out to be more complex or different than you expected?
Yes, I mean, having that strong base here meant that I was able to offer an end-to-end experience for the clients, especially on the fund market. We were able to offer them the fund finance with people on the ground, with NAV financing, equity bridge, and supply and support the whole value chain. Mm-hmm. So we were able to offer the accounts, open the accounts, of course, but also with the financing, with the FX and the FX teams on the ground, we were able to really offer the full experience. And that's really something that was different in my experience.
And concretely, do you have any, specific example, for example, that illustrates that kind of thing?
Yes, so one example I give is when, as part of my tour, when I joined, something that really struck my eye, but was normal for everybody on the ground, because they had been doing this for years, is I was close to the client service team on the floor in Luxembourg, in ING Luxembourg. And so there was a client calling in the morning saying, well, I have this 1 billion deal closing happening this afternoon. It's in USD. And unfortunately, I forgot to open the account in USD. I only have the accounts in Euro.
Wow.
That was probably 9:30 in the morning. And without, the team, supporting the client and gets USD accounts for from the top code to the SPV, there would be FX involved, and for a deal of 1 billion, of course, you would have hundreds of thousand euros applied. So what struck my mind, to answer your question, was the ability for the team being on the phone with the client to say, you just need to send us an email because the account is the legal entity is already KYC'd and the account is already live with us. You only need to send us an email. We'll open the accounts and make it operational on the back of this email. You don't need to assign, anything more. And then the client service person turned to the middle office team sitting next to them and said, this one is very priority. Can you have it open? And in less than an hour, actually, in this case, I think in less than 15 minutes, the accounts were operational from the top code to the SPV. The accounts were operational in USD. The client was even surprised that it was that fast and super happy because it saved a lot of time and costs in this case.
Okay, very interesting. So now, if we zoom out a bit, how would you describe the corporate banking market in Luxembourg, and what is different from other European markets?
Yes, so I would start with the history of Luxembourg, because it's important to know where we are. So obviously, banking in Luxembourg started with private banking, then evolved in the 60s with custody for the UCITS, and corporate banking is the last child of the banking family, if you want. So it's a little bit less unknown compared to the other two. When you work in the banking industry, people often assume that you're either working in custody or private banking. Corporate banking is, there is less knowledge about what we do, what it's for. I think that's the first point. Second point is that I think it's also fair to say that in terms of demand and supply, the supply has probably gone down a bit in the last 10 years, while demand was, multiplying tremendously, especially with the private banking boom. You had actors like Commerzbank that, left the market. And on top of that, the amount of regulation also increased. I think also because Luxembourg wanted to, show to the likes of FATCA and that in terms of, it was behaving properly and it was not on the grey list. And so it did all the right thing, but it made, corporate banking sometimes a bit more difficult in Luxembourg than compared to other countries. In summary, I would say the amount of demand is still very high, and the number of banks that are truly able to support this type of, high-end clients is still limited. So if you want to bank with experts, the choice sometimes is still limited, yeah.
So that could be a good opportunity as well for current players here in Luxembourg. And where do you see the biggest structural changes in Luxembourg, and what could be still underestimated?
Yes, so in terms of change, the market is moving, and Luxembourg is of course not isolated. Mm-hmm. So I would like to step back a bit and just mention that, we are 2 years after the Draghi report, and there has been, political frustration in Europe that, this report was released and that nothing real and concrete was delivered. So there has been political pressure to get things done concretely. I think, the discussion about the capital markets union is one. It's still not here, but there is, more likelihood that it will happen. But in the short term, you have had some small steps that have been delivered. The first one was, the authority of the ESMA on the, traditional asset managers that is encompassing, I would say, wider capacity in Europe. Mm-hmm. And we have seen that, not all countries were happy about that, but that's just like the European market being more consistent and seamless. Another thing I would like to mention is the authority that has been created on AML, so the AMLA, that's now headquartered in Frankfurt. And
yeah, by the way, I encourage you to look at our blog, because we just published already an article yesterday on that topic. It's precisely, yes, that's a hot one.
Hot topic, and why? Yeah. Because it's now a regulation that's going to come into force for all of Europe in July 2027. And what it means in concrete terms is that it is trying to have the same KYC requirements for all of Europe. Everybody's talking about how painful it is to open an account. Sometimes it's different between Luxembourg and France or Germany. Now the objective is to have like a consistent set of requirements, making it easier for clients to look at Europe as one single market. Back to our discussion on the Draghi report. The way we see this is that it is a change, so there will be, winners and losers in terms of countries. My view is that the countries where it is most difficult to open accounts will have like better opportunities, and the countries where it was easiest to open accounts will have to increase a little bit their set of requirements.
Which ones?
So for the countries like Germany, where it was most difficult to open accounts, I think they will come, closer to the other countries, and some countries like Ireland or maybe the Netherlands will see, I would say, an increase in the level of requirements that is asked to them. And what I also see is that for all clients, the big financial sponsors, the big actors that need to open accounts every day, it's also a chance for them to look at Europe at one single location, one single region, as opposed to multiple silos. And I think there's probably a shift for them to look at, what teams they have. Do they have like fragmented teams in different countries? And will they want, for example, to like centralize one factory for account opening for Europe, as they currently have already for APAC or for the Americas? So that's something that's going to take, a couple of years, but we're starting that trend now.
Sorry. Sorry,
Vincent, if you allow me, I also had in mind that I wanted to touch base on CRD6. So CRD6 means that there is more substance needed to operate in Europe. I think it's also related back to my point on the Draghi report. And what it means is that you can no longer, operate from, the UK and do all of your, credit issuance facilities out of the UK. You need to have substance in the European Union. And so it means that in concrete terms, again, you will have some players that, to stay in the European market will have to shift up their presence in Europe. And I think Luxembourg has, a good card to play here.
Okay, so capacity to welcome new players, or at least existing players, but needing some substance here in continental Europe and the Union to continue operating especially the credit process. Okay, now if we look at day-to-day operation, what are the main constraints here, and where do they create the toughest trade-offs in practice?
Yeah, so I think if I look at clients, they want more action. They want probably less talk from their partners, and in particular banks. They want an ability to have clear KPIs, clear turnaround times, clear commitments, and know exactly that, if they need to do something very quickly, they can call their bank or their partner and look at this being a safe place. So yeah, I think the constraint for all clients is to be able to rely on their banks as real partners, not just providers of a service under an SLA, but count on them that if there's something that's really urgent, they want somebody to be here after 3 p.m. and get things done and just make it happen. So I think there's a big reality call for us bankers to ensure that we keep this, I would say, level of service very high, especially for the in the financial institutions and for the private capital clients. There is a real need for service and trust. So I think that's important.
And more concretely, do you have any concrete example where a trade-off actually costs something? I don't know, time, deal, a client, something, more specifically.
Yes. So again, in concrete terms, the way we see our relationship with the private equity clients, for example, they need to get LPs investing very quickly, or they need to make a deal closing, and that needs to happen fast. When we are talking to them on the treasury side, they get enormous pressure from their deal teams who want things to be happening tomorrow. So our job is to help them digest that pressure that's coming from the deal teams, and our job is to give them concrete, I would say, security that they're not putting their jobs at risk because they're working with a specific bank. So in concrete terms, we've just replied to an RFP where with one of the top players in the market, we were able to commit in an account opening for all their new account openings for their new funds in less than 10 days. Okay. Actually, in February for that player, we opened in 4 days for the account to be operational, both on the credit and on the debit side. So this is concrete stuff that our clients need, so that when they plan their deals in advance, they know we have their back.
Yeah, okay, so that's their constraints, and in the end, that's your constraints. It implies constraints for you. And how do you manage to deal with those constraints? Because, okay, you just took the example of opening a bank account in less than 10 days. I guess that doing so, it's not natural, because otherwise that wouldn't be specified as a constraint. So how do you deal with that kind of thing? Does it mean more resources, better processes, change of tools, insurance? So where are the trade-offs once again?
In this case, so I would say the process that we have delivered, which is called Fast Track by ING, is delivered because we have aligned the resources using the teams on the ground from ING, but also we have delivered, I would say, a global factory for account opening that is also leveraging our back office team in Manila in the Philippines. And we have now a dedicated team that is able to support specifically the financial sponsors. So this team is an expert in supporting the account opening for this specific client group. Yes, and as a result, they have specific process. We anticipate, because we know the client, we already know the fund, and because we know at the fund level there is some work that we can anticipate by knowing the fund for the next SPV, for example, that is going to be opened with us. So by having, I would say, the collaboration between the teams fronting the clients on the ground in Luxembourg, people dedicated to this specific client, we are able to give the consistency to the client and also commit on timelines, which is also giving clarity for the client.
And given all that, then what makes the difference between banks on the market, and what do the best players get right?
So I think first, as I said, people want action, not talk. So if you're here to, spend your time discussing with the client and not deliver, then I think ultimately you're not going to be seen as a reliable partner with the client. Second, I think you need to show predictability with the client. So we always talk to our clients about our model, which is reliable and scalable. It's one thing to open one account, but if the client actually has like 300 legal entities that they need to take care in Europe or in Luxembourg, they want to ensure that they can rely on us. And I would say the third one is having sector expertise. And this sector expertise means that if the client is buying in a specific sector, let's say a data center, for example, they need to know that, they have teams in front of them that know, what this is, how this is going to be financed. And this is also historically one of the very strong points of ING. We have, strong DNA in lending. We know what it means to lend to clients. And so we have that relationship where by lending at the GP level, at the sponsor level, or on the, on the operational entity that is being bought, we are creating this relationship, and it means we can look at the relationship holistically, not just because we open accounts, not just because we do the financing, but because we bring everything together to have that holistic view.
If I come back to that last point of having the right expertise on board, we are facing here in Luxembourg a question of talent attractiveness and sourcing, the right talents. Probably there is some competition among the different players here to keep and to attract the proper expertise. How do you manage that? In practice.
Well, that's also what I mean by having a network. So ING has a network, and I think we in Luxembourg, we need to keep our humility. I don't think Luxembourg will ever have all of the expertise of the world. So if you are a client and you have a bank in Luxembourg, you need also to look at the network of this bank, and what if the expertise is not there? Well, on our side, we can connect with our network, and taking the example of the data center, we will bring our data center experts, which, to be honest with you, do not exist in Luxembourg. So we connect either to Amsterdam or to Germany, and we bring that expertise. That's the first possibility. The second possibility is we, as a bank, need to decide whether this is strategic to have that expertise on the ground. That's what we did when we launched our fund finance, I would say, hub in Luxembourg. It's now one of the 4 hubs globally for ING in fund finance, which means we can offer NAV financing, equity bridge financing with a team that's here on the ground. And that's a very strong differentiator, because there are very few banks that have this on the ground here.
Thank you. And now if we look ahead, what will determine whether Luxembourg will strengthen or loses its position as a particular market in Europe?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. I think historically Luxembourg has always been very clever in being more flexible, anticipating things better, copying what works outside. So I think if Luxembourg wants to stay very competitive in Europe, it has to bring that different touch, which is maybe a bit more liberal, that is bringing a view that we no longer have, unfortunately, in the EU since the UK left. But we have to have that view, which is a different view, which is humble, but which is bringing something different in terms of let's be concrete, let's be pragmatic. And I would say with, from Mr. Juncker to many others, we have had that in Luxembourg. And that's what I, living in Luxembourg as both like a citizen and an employee, I would like to see being continued, because this has been the DNA of Luxembourg to always be at the forefront of offering the best of EU here in Luxembourg.
Yeah, that's what we all expect, of course, but what could be wrong? I mean, what would have to happen for Luxembourg to lose ground?
Well, that's a very good question, and we're getting into very political territory, but I think if you look at the last 30 years, regardless of the parties, there has always been a very strong pragmatism. Luxembourg always wanted to keep its AAA, and there has always been a very pro-business attitude. I think if that were to change, that would be a hit in the, I would say, in the edge that Luxembourg has built. But to be honest, I don't really see that coming. And from everywhere I'm looking at, I'm still very positive about the future.
But that's more the political view,
yes.
I would say, but we could also imagine some other aspects. I mean, for example, the change in European regulation or something, maybe,
Yeah, so if you, going back to the Draghi report, if you wanted to sort of remove any local, regulation, then you would only have central regulators, and I think it would be more difficult for one single country to stand out in the competition. I see that we are in a trend. It's also the European Union, so sometimes it takes a very long time. So maybe it's a case for the next 20 or 30 years. But what I see in the recent past, with Luxembourg having implemented a very clever regulation on taxing the carry for the private equity companies, I think we're still going in the right direction. If you look at also what happened in the UK, Luxembourg was also very pragmatic, and I think that's what people expect when they think about Luxembourg.
Okay, so I think that we can conclude with this positive and optimistic view. Thanks, Grégoire. It was very insightful. Thank you again for your time. And thank you for watching.